Good morning, all, and welcome to part 2 of the B+LNZ New Zealand Webinar Series, Grow Your People, Grow Your Farm. Thank you very much for registering and being here today, and I'm sure those that are out and about will be able to watch this at a later date, so we welcome you who are listening later as well. We know that in farming, your people are your greatest asset, and this 4-part series is specifically designed to equip you, our farm employers, and inspiring leaders with the knowledge and skills to confidently and effectively train others on your farm. And so what's the ultimate goal of this series? It's to be able to help improve competence, build confidence within your teams, and ultimately drive productivity across your business. We believe that by investing in people, you truly grow your farm, and especially when we view people as an investment, not as a cost. In the first part of the series, which was 2 weeks ago, we heard from Lee Estridge from Number 8 HR and Wairarapa farmer Mark Guscott around understanding how people learn. You can go back and listen to this if you missed it. It's either a podcast or video by visiting our website under the Employment Hub under Continuous Learning, and that is where all the series will be housed. And you will also receive the recording from today via email for those of you that are on. Today, we're going to focus on effective on-farm training methods before, in 2 weeks' time, moving to measuring confidence and competency, where Lee Estridge will join us again. And then 2 weeks after that, on the 11th of July, we will be joined by Sarah Donaldson, who is a clinical psychologist, working with different generations of people effectively. So the whole series will come together then, and hopefully there'll be something that you will all take away from each piece. So a few housekeeping things for today. Please keep yourself muted if you're not speaking. Should your rural broadband be pushing the limits, turn your cameras off. We'll spotlight our speakers and the screens, which hopefully at the moment you're seeing a title screen and then us to the side. And any resources mentioned will be referenced in the following up details of today as well. So today we are fortunate enough to have 2 ladies who together have a wide range of experiences and learning to share from their time in vocational education, and especially the teaching space. First up, we have Carolyn Patchett, whom is a teaching and learning coach at Primary Otago, which means she supports and coaches staff to ensure the success of work-based learners. She has a background of tertiary teaching and vocational training in horticulture and agriculture. And as you will hear today, has a passion for helping people and learners thrive. Joining her is Marianne Awburn, who is the current agriculture sector manager at Primary Otago. She began her career as a cow freerer and farmed full-time before working as an AB technician and training as a secondary school teacher. And she now focuses on translating on-farm training needs into relevant course content. And alongside them, we have a humble Central Otago farmer, Sam Stevens, who has lived and breathed different on-farm training methods in his business, and we'll be working alongside Carolyn and Marianne this morning to share the real-life experiences and case studies, and I'm sure you guys will have some experiences that you may also want to add into the fold. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Carolyn to finish up some of those introductions and get on to today's conversation. So welcome, Carolyn.
Kia ora, Olivia, thank you. Kia ora koutou, everyone. My name is Carolyn Patchett, and I'm beaming into you from sunny Whakatū, Nelson, top of the south. I'm not going to spend too long introducing myself. Olivia's done a great job, but it's really great to be here. I am the Teaching and Learning Aqua Coach for Primary ITO, and in my role, I support our training advisors and our staff and our learners to ensure that we are getting the best for them in terms of learner success. Looking forward to presenting to you today about training, and before we get into that, I'll hand over to my colleague, Marianne.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marianne, as Carolyn and Olivia have already highlighted too. I am based in the Waikato and actually up until very recently on a dairy farm. Have learned a bit about sheep and beef. So really looking forward to talking and focusing on shame beef today, and obviously training in that space. And Sam, do you want to tell us where you're from?
Yeah, g'day. I'm farming down in central Otago in the Ida Valley, run a Pole Dorset stud there. I've also been an agriculture teacher for a number of years, and am most recently working as a tutor for primary ITO. So a lot of my experiences with staff and young people are around an educational point of view as well.
Kia ora, Sam. Thank you. So we are, Marianne and I obviously are primary ITO, and as you can see that on the slide, but our focus today is about training. But just as a quick background, we lead work-based learning in the food and fibre sector. And in 2024, we had almost 13,000 people training in around nearly 4,000 different workplaces across the country. So in terms of training, we provide what we call formal training. So those are qualifications or apprenticeships, and what we also call informal training. So they might be one-off workshops, compliance short courses, or micro-credentials. What we know in terms of food and fibre is that our exports are on track to break new records this year of close to 60 billion. We know that in the meat and wool sector, the export revenue is up 8%, and it's tracking to come in at about 12.3 billion. And we know a workforce that undertakes effective training is the key to increasing productivity in the food and fibre sector. And I underline the word effective, okay? And I'm going to talk a bit about that today in terms of training. So this session is really about the importance of training your people well for your business. So just to start, we're really keen to see who our audience is and who we're talking to and where you're from. So obviously we've shared a wee bit about where we're from. If you are able to, we'd love to know that. And I can see some people are already perhaps answering in the chat, which is awesome. So the question is, where do you farm and how many staff do you have?
Other people as well from Waikoikoi, West Otago, 5 full-time staff members. That's quite a lot. So lots of people there talking about having 5 staff, another person, Dave Milne, 5 full-time, and also a growing future farmer student. So very interesting. Lots of different people putting in
that's
the
great.
chat there. Yeah. All South
Thank
Island,
you.
so maybe we're not having too many. Oh, Turangi is there represented as well. Perfect.
Great. And that's really neat to know that we've got, a variance in terms of some have got 5, some have got 1. Lots of experience on the call, which is awesome. And we will draw on you throughout the session. And we do encourage you to participate, ask questions, share your experience, and we will have time for you to do that throughout. So thank you very much for that. So just to get into it, why learn about training? Well, we think as a training provider, but also just in general, that training matters. Training needs to be appropriate, intentional, and essential, and training needs to be embedded into the goals of your business. So we know that when we train well, it works. So what we also know is that workplaces in which employers offer constant training create a constant learning culture. We know that new skills and new ways of working lead to more production and more profit. Workplaces that train tend to be more innovative. They're better at using employees' knowledge and skills. They improve product quality and customer service. And people who work in businesses where training is valued, people feel valued, okay? So there's less staff turnover. People tend to stay. In terms of training needing to be appropriate, intentional, and essential, people need to understand the reason for training. It must be clear, it needs to be planned, and it needs to be delivered in a way that the learner or the trainee can relate to. So it shouldn't be just seen as a perk of the job. It needs to actually be meaningful and have value and be linked to the goals of the business. And that is my final point, that the reason we need to link training to the goal of the business is because it's really important that the person who's paying for the training is getting the value and the return on their investment. Our session for today is aiming to answer 3 key questions, and they are: who is the most suitable person in your business to do the training? Is on-farm training the training event itself, where it begins and ends? And how do we make training stick? How do we create impact from that training? Okay, so 3 really important questions that I'll aim to wrap some information around and hopefully hear from you guys in terms of your experience. So question 1, who's the most suitable person to do the training? Well, to help us understand this, on the slide here, I've got the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition. Now, you may have seen this before, and this model was developed in the 80s by the Dreyfus brothers. They're American professors, and they described distinct stages of learning a new skill, which are along the bottom of this model, okay, from novice through to expert. And they argue that learners pass through each of these stages when being trained on a new skill. So we go from the novice, the person who knows absolutely nothing, who are rule bound, so they like to follow the rules, through to experts who just know what to do using their experience and their intuition to handle real life situations. A really simple, relatable example could be tying your shoelaces. Okay, something we've all done in the past. We may have to go back a wee way to remember what that was like to learn and to think about the stages we passed through along this scale. We all started out as novices, and then as we got better, we passed through each of those stages. To now, of course, it happens automatically, intuitively, without thought. We just tie our shoelaces, but this was not always the case. So if you take yourself back to that moment in time in your life, and perhaps you've done this with your own children, if you were to teach a 5-year-old this skill today, who do you think would be the most suitable person to teach that skill, and why? Does anyone want to throw out what they think in terms of a response?
Feel free to put it in the chat, guys.
Yeah, chuck in the chat if you're a bit shy. My 10-year-old, says Dave Milne.
Awesome. And why?
My daughter taught her brothers being closer to their level. So that was from Keys.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's about the beginner, or the person who is learning is better to be taught by the person who is, as you said, Dave, closest to them in terms of their skill level. So
well, Dave said because he's got more patience.
Well, that could be part of it too. But yes, it's about making sure, or often the best person to teach the person a new skill is someone who's actually just gone through that experience themselves. Okay, so they're slightly better in terms of the scale. They might be a beginner or a competent person, and they are the best person to teach the novice. So sometimes it's not us as the farmer who is the best person to do the training. And I understand this can be difficult if you are a sole operator, or if you've got one staff member and it's you. But the key here is for you to remember, or just to be mindful of the fact that your knowledge may be intuitive and not at the right level for the person you're teaching. So what we need to remember is that we need to be able to meet people we're training at the stage they're at. And sometimes we've noticed, and you may notice on your farm, is that the problem can be that we often have the expert teaching the novice. And the issue with this is that we all have these things called mental models, and these are our ideas or our ways of doing things. And these mental models are built on years of experience, sometimes resulting in a gap. We're actually blinded to the bit that's missing in terms of what the novice or the beginner needs. And this knowledge is known as our PPK, and you can see this on the model there. So sometimes our PPK may be way up at the expert level, and we're trying to teach the novice who's way down, who's bound by rules and needs concise and clear and, kind of entry-level instruction. We see this in our class days often with tutors, where they are obviously the experts. They're following what we'd call a teacher-led model, and the learner they're teaching is often at the beginner, perhaps at the competent stage, because we're in work-based learning, but they're being offered new and complex and overly complicated information. And one way we can overcome this in a classroom-based situation is that we can try and encourage more peer-to-peer or group activities that enable us to use learners who sit across that scale, from beginner, competent, proficient. Obviously in work-based learning, we're going to get a range of competencies across that scale. But your role really as a trainer is to be mindful of who your learners are and to kind of adjust what you're doing for that. And why does the Dreyfus model or the skill acquisition model matter? Well, everyone you train is a learner, okay? So everyone appears in the model along that scale at some point. And depending on what the skill or task that you're teaching them, you need to be aware that all learners on that scale will shift, and it is task and skill dependent. And as I said to you, it matters because you need to be conscious of being on what we call expert island. Now, expert island is a place where you can sit out as the expert in your own little world, operating in your, under your intuitive nature and not being aware of that gap that actually exists in terms of the foundational knowledge that your learner may need in terms of the training skill or activity that you're trying to teach them. So it's sort of about being mindful of your own behavior and constantly asking yourself, what if I was in their shoes? If I was this learner, taking yourself back there to that place, because we've all been those people, right, who were novices, beginners, gaining competency, and now obviously functioning in the expert space. So just as a reflection for yourself, in terms of the Dreyfus scale, so remember, being from novice, beginner, competent, proficient, or expert, I've got 3 reflection questions I just want you to think about for yourself. Where do you sit in terms of your specialist farming knowledge? In terms of your practical farming skills? And in your ability to train your staff?
David said proficient. That's where he sees himself in terms of specialist farming knowledge. I'm assuming that's the question that's being answered at the moment. Keys is saying proficient on reporting, farm focus, beginner on practical. So I suppose that's one thing to be aware of. Some of our people in high positions on the farm may be really good in all the technical knowledge, but perhaps they have come to that position via a professional career and actually don't find that they have that many practical skills. Everyone's in a different space. Yeah.
Yes, and that is the point of the model. We all, we are not all expert necessarily. We are somewhere along that continuum. And again, it may depend on what on-farm task you're training in. So in terms of the third question, sitting in the model in terms of your ability to train staff, really interested in people's, where people would place themselves in terms of that continuum. So in your ability to train staff, are you novice, beginner, competent, proficient? And again, I guess it depends on what you're training.
I'm the same boat.
Yeah.
Valerie saying beginner to competent in terms of training. Pete says proficient on farming side, competent on teaching, basic skills, but a novice / beginner at training management staff. Yeah.
Thank you for that. It's really interesting, but it's something for you to just consider and keep in your mind as we work through this. So what we're going to do now is get our humble farmer, as he was described, from Central Otago to give us some examples of some on-farm training examples. Perhaps if Sam's happy to mention some of the challenges with training, how he manages to stay away from expert island, from being that expert out there that has this font of knowledge that's happening intuitively, which means these people he's training are missing some of the key foundational skills. I'm sure he doesn't do that because he's a teacher. And perhaps also around getting the right person to do the training, how that can be challenging as well. So if you're happy to take it away, Sam, that would be great.
Thanks, Carolyn. A lot of my experiences are obviously with students, and with my farm training, I would have a range of abilities that would turn up. What I did find was really useful for, say, example, for the tractor training, it'd always be a couple of 16-year-olds from the Maniatoto who had driven tractors since they were 2, and they were very competent in what they did. And because the tractor's got a passenger seat, you'd put the novice in with them and they would learn by osmosis. Rather than me telling them all the time, it was the the other student doing that. But that example has been mentioned. I suppose one of the key things, my experience has been with students a lot, not so much with staff, but I do take on board the idea that the quicker that the students learnt or the staff learnt, the more I could focus on other things that I wanted to do. And my intention for my students was that when it comes to winter, they could shift the brakes and they could feed out the bales, so I didn't have to, because I'd had a guts full of it. And I would want to be able to concentrating on something else. And so the sooner I had them up to speed, the better. And the time you spend at that initial stage teaching them the basics of, in this case, driving a tractor, being able to stop it, making sure they know how to stop it safely. I know it's pretty basic, but, some of these guys don't know how to do that. What's the health and safety requirements, basic servicing, all that sort of stuff, doing that initially with them and really laboring it and taking your time with that, which was, in some cases pretty frustrating. You felt like you're getting nowhere, but 2 or 3 weeks later, they're off doing it themselves and you're able to focus on other things. So that was a bit of a win, a bit of a game changer for me. And we did have some French exchange students, and it was the same thing. There was a language barrier there. Wanted to get them up to speed so I could go away for the weekend. You got to invest that time initially on the real basic tasks so that you're able to do that. And I suppose there's a couple of things there. One is working out what you want to get out of your staff. Are you getting your staff there or your trainers there to increase the production in your farm or the efficiency on your farm? Does it want to give you time away? Or are you doing it out of the goodness of your heart? There's some resources that you can use in this book, which is called The Lean Dairy Farmer. You take the dairy out. I mean, it has got a dairy farm example, but Lean Farmer. Get hold of that, and it's got some really good tips on how to improve efficiency in your farm. Those are the things that I do.
Sam, can I ask a question? Sorry to interrupt. You mentioned around frustration, and I think Lee spoke about frustration last week. I wasn't actually last time I actually wasn't on the call, but how did you what did you do to kind of overcome that feeling of frustration?
Well, one of the first French exchange student I had was a fellow from Tunisia, actually, and he was basically a spoiled Arab middle class, but he'd never done a day's work in his life. And it was really quite interesting. And we were doing a bit of fencing at home, and he was driving the tractor, back it into the driver and that. And I was sitting beside him saying, no, left hand down, right hand down, da-da-da-da-da. And we did that for about 20 minutes, and I was just getting so pissed off. He was getting really frustrated. And basically all I did was, understood that I taught him or had explained the skills to him, and all he needed was practice. And he didn't need me in his ear telling him what to do all the time, and actually just walking away and going and doing another job. And he got better and better without me there, just been able to practice on his own. Obviously, sometimes with health and safety, you can't do that, but it is, you've got to let them learn by doing, and they'll make a mistake, and you've just got to have the right processes in place so that if they do make a mistake, it doesn't kill them, or it doesn't cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars in wrecked machinery and that sort of carry on. But, once you've got that basic instruction and you're happy with that basic level of competence, that you have to let them go. That's my experience anyway.
Just add in something there too, just going off if you did miss last week. So different learning styles and understanding how people learn will be a good one to go back and have a look at, and to understanding also yourself and your people. So that's what we discussed in part 1. So if you did miss that links well to understanding if that's going to be suitable for the people that you're working with as well. Back to you there, Caroline, with any questions for Sam?
I haven't got any further questions for Sam. Have you got any, Marianne?
No, I think that was a really awesome description of what to do.
Yeah. I think the only thing I would highlight perhaps is that sometimes, and I'm sure this, you mentioned the importance of letting people practice, and I totally agree with that, Sam, particularly if you're learning a practical task. There's no better way of learning other than doing. But I'm interested in the the example you talked about where you had the competent person teaching the novice, the person, like these people are like, I agree with you, have been driving tractors since they could walk, basically. But my question around that would be, how do you know that that person who is supposedly competent is actually doing it the right way? How do you, as a trainer, how would you, or as a farm manager with people on your farm training, how do you ensure that, they've been taught well?
That's a really good question. I have had some students say they could do things and couldn't. For example, we had an old Massey Ferguson tractor on the farm, and the students loved driving it. And I had this one student come to me and said, "Look, it's my turn to drive that tractor." And I said, "Have you driven it before?" I was underneath the mower trying to get it going. We're under a bit of pressure. He said, yeah, I've driven it. And I said, right, away you go and take this load to the dump or whatever it was he was doing. 20 minutes later, one of the other girls walks back and says he's in the ditch, and he'd just about broken his ribs. And he actually bullshitted me. He had lied to me that he had driven that before. And because I was under the pump, trying to get something else done, I took him at his word, believe what he said, and he actually hadn't. And I was very, very lucky that he didn't hurt himself majorly. And as it turned out, the tractor only required, it's a 1965 Massey Ferguson, like had no power steering and all that. So he wasn't used to it. But anyway, so that was a good learning for me. And I'm very lucky when I'm teaching students, there is a checklist of things they have to pass before they move on to the next thing. So for example, with the tractor driving standards at level 2, this is at school age, they have to pass the theoretical elements of being able to service a tractor and all that sort of carry on before they actually can pass the practical driving. Now, for a lot of students, they can do the practical driving, but they don't know how to service it, or vice versa, you know what I mean? So having those stages now in your workplace, it's as simple as having a step, like I need to be able to see that you can do this task before you move on to the next task.
And I guess you'd have SOPs in the workplace too that, and I think what you highlight there is you've got checks and balances right in place. And the other thing Marianne is going to talk about later is assumptions and the danger in those. And Marianne is going to talk about
for me, my health and safety thing, I had to, with having students on farm, I had to really knuckle that down and have a good process with that. Again, I was lucky that the students were doing health and safety papers. But one of the key things I did find for helping the students with identifying where they were and, in what tasks they needed to be completing was a big whiteboard in the wool shed that we outlined the daily tasks, had a farm map, had the hazards, had no-go areas, had who was doing what task, who would be working with them. And it's simple as a team meeting in the morning and doing that and working out who can go with who or whatever. And don't get me wrong, quite often I would be helicoptering, like the students be off doing something and I'd be away watching from a bit of a safe distance to make sure, because once you realise they're okay, then you can concentrate on something else. But
yeah, of course. Yeah. Thanks, Sam. Okay, so the second question we're trying to get some information around is on farm training, the training event itself, where it begins and ends. And interestingly, Sam just has given us a bit of an example there around how he watches from afar, which is really good. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. But on the slide, we've got what we call the 40-20-40 high impact model. And this model was developed by an American called Robert Brinkerhoff. And he developed this, it's called a success case method of productivity. And it's around what high impact learning looks like. So it describes the amount of effort that should be spent on the design and development of each phase of a training or learning experience. His model suggests that more effort should be spent on the experience before the actual training event and after the training event. And if you look at the model here, you can see sort of the before part is around that preparation. How's it linked to the goals of your business? What's the motivation of you and of the person you're teaching in terms of how ready are they for the learning event? So it's, 40% of your effort should go into there. Then the training event itself happens. And then after the training event, it's around ensuring that you are making sure that it's embedded and that you have impact. Okay, so interestingly, there's a really great webinar that is in the references at the end of this, which if you have a spare hour, it's really worth a listen. But he did this research with over 2,000 executives and focused on training. And he asked the question of these people that he asked them, what would the consequence be to them if after a training event they went back to their work and did nothing different? And the majority of the people, as you can probably imagine, responded, well, nothing would happen. And I mean, I'm sure you can imagine yourself where you've been to a training event before, where you've sat in the room, someone's spoken to you, and then you've gone back to work and carried on. And that happens consistently. He notes that despite the millions of dollars that's being spent on training, that training generally has predictable outcomes. And what he means by this is that, and I said at the start that training matters and it works, and it does, but my mantra is it has to be done well. And what I mean by this is that Brinkerhoff notes that after a training event, some people will do nothing. They'll just go back to work and carry on. Some people will try the new skill or the knowledge they've been given, and then perhaps eventually give up because they've been told off by a more senior person, or they've been questioned about why they're doing whatever they're doing in a particular way. And 20% of people will use it. So what we find in primary ITO is that where we have a really solid partnership, and what I mean by that, where you have buy-in from the employer, the training advisor, and the learner, and those parties are invested, we find that we have greater success. Okay, so if something's learnt in class and it's taken back to farm, and the employer asks the learner about what it is they've learnt in class and how they can then apply that to the business operation, that the farmer is more likely to get a better return on investment for their training. Now, fortunately in farming, most of the training, or a lot of the training, is skills-based, and Brinkerhoff notes that skills-based training or technical training gets a greater return on that 20%, because the reason for that is, and we can highlight the example Sam used there, is that the consequences of not following through are serious. For example, if you don't drive the tractor in the correct way, you'll crash it. You could end up really seriously injured, or in fact even killed. So skills-based training in farming, and the results are generally better embedded than they are in more of a corporate type environment. So just want you to think about that, the importance of what I'd call bookending your training. So thinking about, preparing well, making it purposeful, planning it into the goals of your business. And Brinkerhoff even goes further to argue that you should actually tie training into your strategy so that it really has value. Doing the event itself, planning well for that, making sure that it's carried out effectively. And I'm going to go into that a little bit later of how you can do that well. And then at the end of training, closing the loop by providing feedback, check-ins, and ensuring that you get impact from that training. In terms of a plan for how you might be able to do this in your business or on your farm, using Brinkerhoff's success case method and looking at this diagram, the slide goes through 4 main steps: preparation, the training event itself, the application of that training, and the impact of that training. So if we start with the preparation, if we're planning for an event, the training event itself, we need to be thinking about what the key points are of this training, okay? How does it align to the goals of the business? And have we got a commitment from everyone? Is our person we're training actually ready for this training? And am I, as the training manager or the business owner, actually committed to making this work? Timing is obviously really important in terms of training. If you're training for a seasonal task, for example, you need to make sure the training happens before rather than after that, so everybody's prepared in advance. So the training event itself, before you undertake training, I think it's really important, if you say to the person you're training, you actually let them know that you say, hey, there will be some questions at the end of this, so I want to understand what you've learnt, so that they know that that is coming in, it's going to be backed up. When you're training your staff, it's really good if you can think like a coach. So you need to be supportive, the environment needs to be to enable that support. You need to be able to talk through the training and teach and have open and honest discussion and questions and encourage that. And like Sam said, they need to do it. They need to be shown practically how to do the skill or task, and offered encouragement to give it and time to give it a go. And it's really key if we want impact to check in for understanding at the beginning of that process, to make sure that people actually understand what it is, the task that you're trying to get them to do. So the applications, the application of the training. So a key point here is that you need to enable the learner or the person you're training to be able to do the task many times, okay, to practice not just once, but many times. And you may be right there next to them. You may be putting another person in that tractor cab with them, and you may be observing from afar, like Sam said. Or it may not even be the event itself that you are observing. It might be the output of that event that you're noticing on your farm as a consequence of that training. And in my view, the impact of the training, as I've already mentioned, is the most important part. And it's linked to the Brinkhoff model I was talking about before. Really important to set goals so that you know the outcome of that training, to coach and correct along the way if you need to make sure it's aligned to the goals of your business, and to encourage your person that you've trained or has been trained by someone else to engage in that new thinking or that new way of learning, be open to new ways of working. And really, really obviously key is to show interest and be committed to the outcomes of that training. And
alongside that, Carolyn, sorry
yes,
if I just
sure.
butt in there, is when you're setting up this training or learning environment for your staff members, is that the tasks you are wanting them to do or training them to do are standardized. So there is one way that you want, and there's advantages to this. Obviously, it's the way you want it done as a farmer. And, I've all heard this before, that people need to go and get away from dad on the farm so they can go and learn other ways of doing things and all that sort of carry on. But for your staff, what you want is, if there's an electric fence to be shifted or whatever you're doing, there's the way that it is done on your farm, and that is a standard practice. And there's almost like a routine or a manual available. And I mean, this book does talk about having, and what they have for their Filipino staff is like an instruction manual on how to shift the K-line, for example. And that's a bit OTT, but you may have something similar. Okay, when we're doing the feeding out, it is done this way, and it's done this way every day at this time. So I know that the animals are being fed efficiently and properly, and they're going to meet their production targets. So standardizing that task for your staff, makes it simple to learn. People can come in at another day and pick up that task, and there's no swapping and changing or different parameters for them to learn. It's keeping it really simple and keeping it the same.
I think that's key, Sam. I think it's really, really good. And that's exactly how our training actually at Primary Otago works. It's about what aligns to the goals of your business and the way in which you do whatever it is you do on your farm. And I think to highlight, if someone brings new knowledge to your business, right, and you sit down and talk about it or whatever, then if you decide to all adopt that new way, then that's, that aligns still with what you're talking about, Sam, about having a standard procedure for doing something. And part of training, obviously, is to ensure you get consistency, so that you are getting the same output from everybody doing the task in a similar or the same way. So yeah, that's a really good point. The other point I wanted to make was that if you basically sort of have an attitude of sending people away to training to go off and do the event, but you don't get involved, you won't be getting the full benefit of that training or the impact of that training on your farm. So really, really important to kind of buy in to the whole picture of training, beginning, middle, and end. Just again, as a quick sort of reflection task, I'm just interested to understand, and again, you can either use the thumbs up or you can put it in the chat. How many people have staff doing regular training on their farm? If you do, just give us a thumbs up or a yes. Yes, great. How many people, my second question, how many people are asking every time of their staff member, what did you learn today at that training?
that could obviously be external training or some training you've done with them yourself.
Absolutely.
But yeah, checking in with them.
So you can answer that question for yourself, obviously. And then the third reflection question was, how many of you are asking yourselves or asking the person who's been on that training, how can we implement that into our system? So we sort of were talking about that before, Sam, around, you know, consistency of approach to tasks.
So we've got Valerie in the chat who said that on their farm they ask people to share with the wider team, which I think is an
Perfect,
awesome
Valerie.
strategy to
Yeah.
actually let everybody have learn the new thing, whatever one person has learned. And also it helps the person who have learned a new skill really embed it, because there's no better way to learn than to teach, really.
Yeah, fantastic. Shows really good understanding, doesn't it? If you have to then tell others about what it was that you undertook. Thank you. The next thing we're going to do is kind of following along the lines of Brinkerhoff's before, during, and after model. Is I'm going to hand over to Marianne, and she's going to talk us through an example on farm.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about shifting stock. And obviously there's a beautiful picture of sheep here, but that could be any kind of stock you've got on your farm. And Sam has already shared some examples of what he would do and what he did do with his French backpackers that needed to learn how to drive the tractor. So if we go into what we would do beforehand, there's some examples here of some things you might say, and some of you might look at that and go, no way, this is too simple. But what you see here is some instructions that are suitable for that learner that has not had any or much experience at all with animals before, or perhaps they know how to handle sheep but not bulls, which they might be doing on your farm. So this explanation could happen before the training event itself, or perhaps during the demonstration. But regardless of that, you should really think of what it is you're going to be explaining as part of your preparation for the training event. So as Lee talked about last time, and Olivia has already alerted to, that last time there was this, Lee went through about how some people are visual, some people are auditory, some people like to read and write, some people like to do. And so if you have an auditory learner, you might find that they really appreciate you talking them through things before you get started even, although you'll find other learners who just wants to see it and do it. And you'll have some learners who have a personality, they just want to get stuck in and they'll actually get frustrated with you talking to them before the event. So in your preparation, when you're thinking about how you're going to be doing this training, that's when you'll be thinking about what kind of person am I dealing with? What would they prefer? How do they each, how do they take on this information I'm about to share with them? And to what level of detail do I need to go into? If you have a brand new staff member, you may not know. And this is where it's really important that you find out. Like Sam said, he asked the student, have you driven the tractor before? And he said yes. And he lied, so that was difficult. But perhaps instead of saying to a learner, have you shifted stock before, you could say to them, can you talk me through how to shift the stock from this paddock to the next? And that'll give you that level of detail that you need to really assess what do they already know and what do I need to teach them. Another thing to think about in your preparation for the training event would be around what Carolyn was saying before, linking it back to your business goals. And in this case where you're shifting some stock, you might talk about how if you didn't do it correctly, the stock might get injured. And that might mean that either that particular animal will now have its growth compromised, or perhaps even you might need to put it down depending on the injury. And of course, that's going to impact on profitability. So you could talk at it from that angle, or you might even link it to a goal around health and safety. and that shifting the stock correctly will keep the person safe, and that there's a goal in your business around that. So think about what business goal are you going to link it to, and choose one so that you're not overwhelming the learner. Nice. So during the actual event, you will be doing it with them. And like I said before, you might be explaining as you go along, depending on the learner, or you might be doing the explanation first and then doing it, demonstrating it, and they're watching you. You might have a learner who's quite capable, so you're actually just letting them have a go, and you're just kind of there with them, watching and guiding them as they go. I'll share a little story about what happened to me once. I had an employer actually ask me, would you feel comfortable shifting the bulls? And I said yes, partly because I wanted to show them how capable I was, and I didn't want to say no, but also because I did have some experience with some bulls, mainly on a dairy farm. I had cut out the bulls at the back of the herd when they were coming to the shed, so I thought I knew how to deal with bulls. In this case, it was 6 Jersey bulls that needed to be shifted from one paddock to another paddock, sort of at the other end of the farm, along a very long, quite narrow race. And we didn't get very far before they stopped and started fighting with each other, and was very close to ruining a trough and some fences right where they were. And luckily I had the employer right there with me, and he sort of took over and got them moving and explained to me around keeping them moving so they didn't start thinking of doing other things. And it's a very good example of how it was this partnership that Carolyn talks about as well, like having everybody there, and like Sam was talking about it earlier as well, about kind of being there, helping them, although he did have that one person that got better in the tractor when he wasn't there, and letting them have a practice, but you'd always make sure that they're ready for that part before you leave them to it on their own. So be there with them initially until they're getting to the point where they're not needing you anymore, I suppose. So yeah, you might reinforce certain things around, if you're stiffening stock, around the corners, animals that needs to stick together. If you're shifting some stock that might be dangerous, talk about what to look out for.
I think Marianne, just highlight your point there too. I think it also highlights the word we talked about before, assumptions. I mean, before we were talking about assumptions from the employer's point of view, in terms of assuming what someone on your farm might know, but actually what you highlight there was your assumption around the fact that you knew what to do, but actually perhaps if you'd been asked some further questions, you might have actually found out yourself that you didn't know, and to not assume that knew what to do because you'd done it before, kind of thing. So yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yes, my assumption of the task was different to their assumption of the task. Nice. So and then once you've sort of done it, you've done some practicing, you've let the learner have a go. Afterwards, for a new learner, you might actually have to do this a few times. You might need to show them and then let them have a go and all that. For another learner who have done this plenty of times, you may be able to move on to more difficult parts of the task sooner. So in this particular example, of course, we don't want learners to just shift stock from paddock to paddock. We also want them to check on all the infrastructure at the same time. But if a learner had no clue on what they're doing, that might be too much information at the start. So that's something you need to think about when you're planning for the event, and then afterwards evaluate, can I now straight away dive into this, or do we need a bit more time? And when you are doing that, again, coming back to the assumption thing, on our farm, often, you'll just get asked to check the trough. But what does that actually mean, right? We've had staff members who thought that meant racing past the trough at speed on their motorbike, looking over to see if there was water in the trough. When in reality, we wanted them to actually stop, get off their bike, put their hand into the trough and open up the valve if it was closed, to make sure that the water is going into the trough and not out of the trough when the valve is open. Make sure that everything is in one piece so that when the trough is full, that valve will shut off. So yeah, clarify, and that's what Sam was saying before as well. Have those specific SOPs, like basically what does this task look like on your farm? What are your expectations around what needs to be done? And then, like Carolyn's already talked about, what is some way that you might then evaluate if the learner is ready to do it completely unsupervised? And sometimes you might need to actually watch them do it. Sometimes there's no other way, but sometimes you might be able to actually look at the outcome and notice that they that what came out of it at the end was right. There was no leaking troughs, there was no holes in the fences, and all the stock came safely from one place to another. So that shows that they were now able to shift the stock. So it's sort of thinking about how you're going to check it. And if you are sending that learner out being trained by another staff member, just maybe ask yourself, would that staff member feel comfortable or confident enough to say to the learner or to you that I don't feel this person is yet ready to be doing this task by themselves? So it's just something to think about when you're training in your workplace and you have multiple people, and perhaps if you have looked at the Dreyfus model and you're actually using someone who's quite close to the learner in terms of ability and in terms of reporting lines, how are they going to feel about putting a stop to the other person having, a go by themselves?
Marianne, I'm just going to come in there. We've had a chat come through in regards to, we've implemented low stress animal handling skills. We use more passive actions and work with animals on their balance lines. This has enabled our staff to become confident and / competent a lot quicker, and it's also a lot better for the animals' health and well-being. No motorbikes, beeping horns, yelling, sticks or flappers. So that's a really good point there, and thank you for sharing that, Tash. And we're going to be diving into the how do we measure confidence and competence next week, in 2 weeks' time, sorry, at the next webinar. So we'll go into that, how we measure that stuff later on, but actually being able to get that started and implement those pieces in your training is great. So it's a bit of feedback and another example there, Marianne.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Tash. We love it when people share stuff. So that's great. And I love the low stress animal handling stuff. We need more people to be doing it that way. Nice. Back over to you, Carolyn.
Thanks, Marianne. So the final question we sort of want to try and answer is around making the training stick, okay, or making it impactful. And as Sam mentioned earlier, in any training event, your objective is to train staff for consistency so they can remain safe and that they're efficient in their role. And obviously, we want greater productivity and greater profit. So I've come up with this acronym. It's not mine, it's not new. It's known as EDIP, and it covers a step-by-step process to use for the training event itself. I really like it because it covers a number of those learning styles that fit within VARC that you spoke about last time. And as we've already sort of touched on again today, we're dealing with people's values, people's learning styles come into the way in which they best respond to training. So it's really, really important to keep that in mind. So just to quickly run through the steps, quite self-explanatory. Explain is around, what they're going to learn and why they need to learn it. Demonstrate is around showing them how to do the task multiple times. Imitate is letting them have a go, so giving time for them to copy exactly what you did more than once, not just once. And obviously it depends on the person you're training. And practice, this is where you actually allow them time to practice, either away from you or with you still. And you need to be constantly checking in through this whole process for understanding, okay, asking questions, encouraging them to ask you questions, making sure they've got the same understanding of the task or the skill that you're teaching them. And then the evaluation piece, which actually I've added on to this. EDIP usually has no E on the end, but I think it's missing an E. And I think evaluate, which I think is the most important part to me, is around the checking in. And again, relating it back to Brinkerhoff around, if you don't check in within a week on how that new skill or task that they've been trained on is going and give them feedback, tell them what they're doing great or give them feed forward, something they could do better, then you will find that the training and the impact of the training is actually least or ineffective. So what Brinkerhoff notes, and I'm going to reiterate it again, is that the greater the gap in implementation, so the time from giving feedback, the less likely it is to have impact and stick. So this really needs, for this to work well, it needs buy-in and commitment from the business. If it's not lived and breathed and talked about, Brinkerhoff argues that the impact of training can be undone in as little as 30 seconds. Okay, if you don't live and breathe and share and believe in the training, even by making a comment about the training or not encouraging your person to embed and implement the training, you could say a throwaway comment, and that training, whether it was a week, a day, an hour, could be undone in 30 seconds. So really important to think about how it is you are encouraging your person to implement that. I just wanted to highlight some questions, and Marianne sort of provided us with a great example actually around training and the impact, and around that sort of assumption point. And Marianne said, her boss said to her, do you feel comfortable shifting the bulls? Now, there is actually something wrong with that question, and I've got a whole list of them here. There's some other ones like, do you understand me? Do you have the right tools? Do you know what you're doing? We all good? Thumbs up, we all good? There are some problems with those questions, and Marianne highlighted in her situation, I think you said, Marianne, you didn't feel, you wanted to say yes because you wanted to feel like and show that you knew what you were doing. Is that sort of the gist of it?
Definitely. You want to be good, right?
Yeah. So we have to be careful as trainers or employers that we are not, again, making assumptions or asking questions in a way that we already we know the answer we want, whether it's the correct answer. We need to make sure that a better way of doing this to ensure that our people understand and are clear on the instruction and those steps that I've just talked you through, the EDIPE, that we get them to repeat back to us. So you can make it about yourself and say to your person you're training, can you just repeat back to me, please, what I told you, and under the explain part, so that I know that what I told you was explained well enough. So it's about sort of putting it back on yourself, taking responsibility as the trainer, so that the person you're training feels comfortable and confident to ask the appropriate questions, and you sort of build that culture of trust and learning. Yes, I just want to reiterate, it's really, really important to check for misunderstanding. Otherwise, you could end up in situations, like Sam's tractor situation, for example, where he thought, a bit of a different situation because he's being lied to, but perhaps he could have done some further digging with questioning, who knows, but just to be mindful of that. We did have another farmer lined up. Unfortunately, he's sick today, and they were going to give us another example of some training examples and how they're part of their farm routine and what the outcome is. But hopefully we might have someone else.
Yeah, we can have a chat about, so Tasha's put in the chat.
Great.
This is about the low stress stock handling. And she said that it is part of the induction and initial training process on their farm. They also have a vet consultant that comes over from Aussie to grow their skills in this area. And it has been hard to instill these principles in those that have previously done a lot of stock work under traditional practices. But she said, we now have good depth and experience within the team. And I think this is a really beautiful example, Carolyn, of what you were talking around, making sure it is a real goal for your business and making sure it's something you stick with and that you live and breathe, because clearly this has been a bit of a process. And I don't know, Tasha, if you're willing to come off mute and have a brief chat about it, but it's really something I can see in your sharing. It looks like it's something that you've made a focus and that you've made it happen and you've done what it took, basically.
Hi, sorry, I'll just start my video as well. Yeah, so it's been a number of years since we started the low stress stock handling. It was actually my boss that started it. So I'm livestock manager and he's feedlot manager. Started off with the Aussie consultant coming over, and we were all very traditional. We had our flappers, we yelled, we hooted, hollered, we use sticks. And when he first came, we all thought that he was a bit of a lunatic, to be perfectly honest. And then we sort of stopped and looked and listened and started to understand where he was coming from. And then it all started to make sense. And it was through my boss's support to keep getting him back sort of 2-3 times a year and keep improving us, because we'd sort of find that we'd creep back a little bit. You know, he'd put these new ideas and teach us the principles of it and sort of raise our skill set, but then gradually, you know, with frustration when things don't go quite right, you creep back to your old ways. So it's just that constant repeat, Kev's coming, we've got to keep up with the good work, and now we've got it across the team, everyone understands it, and we will pull one another up on it if someone's standing in the wrong place or not doing something quite right. And it's been really, really good to see the change in the animals, how much easier they are to handle, and yeah, especially the staff confidence around animals that, you know, will be a little bit more fiery. The way we handle them makes them, everything's quieter, quite a bit slower, but then makes it quicker because you're not working against the animal, you're working with them.
No, okay.
Well, sorry, I was
just...
Sorry, I was just going to say that one of the impacts for me, and I'm only a wee farmer, and it's a solo operation, so the sooner I could train, whether it was a French exchange student or some of my other students to do it, or casual labour or whatever, it enabled me, the better I trained them, or the more confident they were with doing the tasks I wanted, it enabled me to get away to watch kids sport. And, you know, for me, it was about, the impact for me was being able to refresh myself so that I could get away and do the things, you know, the other things that I wanted to do. And I think probably the key message I would take is that if you've got a purpose for your training, whether it be ITO training for your staff to have a pathway, or it's skills-based training on your farm so they can do it your way, whichever way it is, whatever training it is making sure you have that impact, if you like, or that purpose is the forefront of your planning for your training.
Yeah, just a couple of points that come up in the chat here.
Sure.
So one is, it's a lot easier to train someone who has questions than someone that just nods and says that they think what you think you want to hear. So struggling to get engagement when implementing new tech. Sam, do you have any feedback on that and how you've maybe navigated some of that? Just that, is it asking more questions, or what do you do in those situations?
It's a real good one. And as a teacher, it's very easy for a student to say, yeah, and sit quietly at the back of the class and not do anything, and they don't learn anything. And it's easier to forget about them because they've been so compliant, if you like. I completely agree. The way to get around that, I suppose, is to, and I think it was Marianne mentioned it before, when you do give a list of tasks, make sure they repeat it back to you.
Yeah, I said that. It's asking the right questions, isn't it, Sam?
Yeah.
Getting them to repeat back to you what you've said so you can check for understanding.
Yep. And look, I wouldn't be afraid. Like, I mean, admittedly, this is more from a student point of view, with 16, 17-year-olds, is if they say they can do something, is say, okay, away you go then, and then go and spy on them. Sit at the top of the ridge and watch them. And then when they've finished, go, okay, well, how did that go? How'd you feel you went? And ask them directly, you know, there's the reflective side of it. And maybe you've watched them do the task and say, well, okay, maybe try this, and this next time to speed things up. Especially if it's taken them an hour and a half to shift a 15-minute electric fence because they've walked it, 15 times.
Sometimes asking that question in the right manner. So it's being able to have a question that's open for them to feel like they're not going to fail. So, for example, if you ask somebody, what do you think is the key reason for drench failures? It's kind of asking for a right or wrong answer. But if you ask them, what do you think may be the key reasons for drench failures? It gives them that confidence and that permission to put their own thoughts into it. So rather, it's what do you think? So what we'll do is we'll share also with this follow up as well with some resources in regards to different ways to ask questions, because I think that's come up quite a bit over the session today that might help you guys as well going forward. Just a couple more from the chat. Valerie, in my experience, it helps to get an external subject matter expert in. Often staff seem to be more open-minded to change and new skills when it comes to an outsider, and that definitely can be the case in some places, and it's making sure following up that when you're on farm. I think we spoke about that earlier before as well, as people go off farm. So the Generation Next program, for example, we had people go off farm. They do that program where we encourage employers when they come back onto farm to share those learnings, share it back with the team, share what you've learned, and have those conversations. It's kind of like learning from mum and dad. You always listen to the neighbours more than you probably listen to mum and dad. I get my learners to ask themselves, before we start a new job, to ask themselves some questions. So that's a really good one. Why are we doing this? How can we make it better? Is there a more efficient way to do that? So those are some really cool questions there too that Leslie's put up.
Excellent. I think another really good one is, sometimes asking the question, what problem are we trying to solve? Like, what is the actual reason for this? But also just around that point we were talking about before, I think really key to set your learners up for success when and wherever you can, or your trainees, so that they, and I mentioned earlier around developing that culture, that culture that enables questioning, queries, within your workplace. Just to finish off, I've got a little self-reflection here for you, and they kind of feed back into those 3 questions we had at the start around right person, did it relate to the goals, and how do you know if you've had impact? So I want you just to think of some on-farm training that you've done recently, or maybe a training event you've been to yourself. And the 3 questions are: what confirms the right person did the training? Which business goal did the training relate to? And how do you know the training you did had impact or has stuck?
I do think that might link back to, Carolyn, what you said right at the beginning around making sure that the learner's ready when you're doing the training. Because while we might think that they need to learn something, and we might think that they need to do a new task or do that task differently, that person may not be of the same mindset. And if it is, for example, you've used flappers and you've been yelling and using motorbikes, and you now want to do it in a low stress way, it could be a matter of we're doing it this way, or you're not in our business. Like, it could be as simple as that. Like, this is a goal for our business, and you're either in or you're out. But if it is a person that's employed to perhaps only shift the stock, and suddenly you want them to start doing some sharing, then perhaps it is actually within their right to say, I'm not interested in doing the sharing. And perhaps it's something you need to talk about. Is that actually a skill that they want to learn? Is it a skill they need to learn? Is a learner ready and willing? I don't think we can lead a horse to water, but we can't force them to drink. I think that's kind of the thing I'm trying to get across.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point, Marianne.
But thank you very much to Caroline and Sam and Marianne for being part of today and sharing some of your experiences, and also to all of you who have come on and shared some of your experiences as well and opened up with some of those. So what we'll do is we'll pull all those together. We will share with you the slide pack and the references and that, as well as this recording, for you to go back and whether you want to share it with others or go through it again. And then you'll also be able to use the Beef and Lamb Employment Hub to be able to find extra resources going forward. So really, thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully this has been of some help for you, and we look forward to you being part of the next part, which is on the 27th of June, so every second Friday, and part 3 will be measuring confidence and competency. So we are moving down the track with regards to that.